The eye is not shaped like a perfect sphere, rather it is a fused two-piece unit, composed of the anterior segment and the posterior segment. The anterior segment is made up of the cornea, iris, and lens. The cornea is transparent and more curved, and is linked to the larger posterior segment, composed of the vitreous, retina, choroid and the outer white shell called the sclera. The cornea is typically about 11.5 mm, 0.3 in diameter, and 1/2 mm, 500 m, in thickness near its center. The posterior chamber constitutes the remaining 5/6. Its diameter is typically about 24 mm. The cornea and sclera are connected by an area termed the limbus. The iris is the pigmented circular structure concentrically surrounding the center of the eye, the pupil, which appears to be black. The size of the pupil, which controls the amount of light entering the eye, is adjusted by the iris dilator and sphincter muscles. Light energy enters the eye through the cornea, through the pupil and then through the lens. The lens shape is changed for near focus, accommodation, and is controlled by the ciliary muscle. Photons of light falling on the light-sensitive cells of the retina, photoreceptor cones and rods, are converted into electrical signals that are transmitted to the brain by the optic nerve and interpreted as sight and vision. Dimensions typically differ among adults by only 1 or 2 mm, remarkably consistent across different ethnicities. The vertical measure, generally less than the horizontal, is about 24 mm. The transverse size of a human adult eye is approximately 24.2 mm and the sagittal size is 23.7 mm with no significant difference between sexes and age groups. Strong correlation has been found between the transverse diameter and the width of the orbit, r equals 0.88. The typical adult eye has an anterior to posterior diameter of 24 mm, a volume of 6 cubic centimeters, 0.4 cubic in, and a mass of 7.5 grams, weight of 0.25 ounce. Citation needed. The eyeball grows rapidly, increasing from about 16-17 mm, about 0.65 inch, at birth to 22.5-23 mm, approximate 0.89 in, by 3 years of age. By age 13, the eye attains its full size. The eye is made up of 3 coats, or layers, enclosing various anatomical structures. The outermost layer, known as the fibrous tunic, is composed of the cornea and sclera. The middle layer, known as the vascular tunic or uvea, consists of the choroid, ciliary body, pigmented epithelium, and iris. The innermost is the retina, which gets its oxygenation from the blood vessels of the choroid, posteriorly, as well as the retinal vessels, anteriorly. The spaces of the eye are filled with the aqueous humor anteriorly, between the cornea and lens, and the vitreous body, a jelly-like substance, behind the lens, filling the entire posterior cavity. The aqueous humor is a clear watery fluid that is contained in 2 areas, the anterior chamber between the cornea and the iris, and the posterior chamber between the iris and the lens. The lens is suspended to the ciliary body by the suspensory ligament, zonule of Zinn, made up of hundreds of fine transparent fibers which transmit muscular forces to change the shape of the lens for accommodation, focusing. The vitreous body is a clear substance composed of water and proteins, which give it a jelly-like and sticky composition. The approximate field of view of an individual human eye, measured from the fixation point, i.e., the point at which one's gaze is directed, varies by facial anatomy, but is typically 30 degrees superior, up, limited by the brow, 45 degrees nasal, limited by the nose, 70 degrees inferior, down, and 100 degrees temporal, towards the temple. For both eyes combined, binocular, visual field is 135 degrees vertical and 200 degrees horizontal. When viewed at large angles from the side, the iris and pupil may still be visible by the viewer, indicating the person has peripheral vision possible at that angle. About 15 degrees temporal and 1.5 degrees below the horizontal is the blind spot created by the optic nerve nasally, which is roughly 7.5 degrees high and 5.5 degrees wide. Each eye has 6 muscles that control its movements: the lateral rectus, the medial rectus, the inferior rectus, the superior rectus, the inferior oblique, and the superior oblique. When the muscles exert different tensions, a torque is exerted on the globe that causes it to turn, in almost pure rotation, with only about 1 millimeter of translation. Thus, the eye can be considered as undergoing rotations about a single point in the center of the eye. The retina has a static contrast ratio of around 100:1, about 6.5 f-stops. As soon as the eye moves rapidly to acquire a target, saccades, it readjusts its exposure by adjusting the iris, which adjusts the size of the pupil. Initial dark adaptation takes place in approximately 4 seconds of profound, uninterrupted darkness. Full adaptation through adjustments in retinal rod photoreceptors is 80% complete in 30 minutes. The process is nonlinear and multifaceted, so an interruption by light exposure requires restarting the dark adaptation process over again. Full adaptation is dependent on good blood flow, thus dark adaptation may be hampered by retinal disease, poor vascular circulation, and high-altitude exposure citation needed. The human eye can detect a luminance range of 1014, or 100 trillion, about 46.5 f-stops, from 10^6 cd/m2, or 1 millionth, 0.000001, of a candela per square meter to 108 cd/m2 or 100 million candelas per square meter. This range does not include looking at the midday sun, 109 cd/m2, or lightning discharge. At the low end of the range is the absolute threshold of vision for a steady light across a wide field of view, about 10^6 cd/m2, 0.000001 candela per square meter. The upper end of the range is given in terms of normal visual performance as 108 cd/m2, 100 million or 100 million candelas per square meter. The eye includes a lens similar to lenses found in optical instruments such as cameras, and the same physics principles can be applied. The pupil of the human eye is its aperture, the iris is the diaphragm that serves as the aperture stop. Refraction in the cornea causes the effective aperture, the entrance pupil, to differ slightly from the physical pupil diameter. The entrance pupil is typically about 4 mm in diameter, although it can range from 2 mm, f/8.3, in a brightly lit place to 8 mm, f/2.1, in the dark. The latter value decreases slowly with age. Older people's eyes sometimes dilate to not more than 5-6 mm in the dark, and may be as small as 1 mm in the light.